Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for a special show brought to you with Futurum Careers, where we are going to talk all things STEM and SHAPE with two amazing experts from the scientific community, who I will introduce in a moment. Just before I do that, if there's anything that tickles your interest this evening that you'd like to find out a little bit more about, perhaps you're interested in some of the completely free resources that we're going to be discussing, I will be throwing up this QR code at regular intervals tonight, which you can scan to find out more at any point during the show about what we are discussing this evening and sign up for Futurum Careers newsletter. I'll come back to that later. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about STEM and SHAPE aspirations. And as I mentioned, we have got, because I've got my wonderful co-host Hannah alongside me from TTR. We are talking to two amazing experts. We've got Louise Archer and Julia Black. So before we do anything, I think it would be great if maybe first of all, Julia, you could introduce yourself to everybody out there who is watching.
Brilliant, happy to, and thank you, Tom, and thank you to everybody who's with us for this session, and thank you for inviting me. So listen, what am I? I'm an academic. My background's in law. I'm a law professor, but I'm also president of the British Academy, and in the UK, the British Academy is the National Academy for Humanities and the Social Sciences. So what does that mean? That means that we have fellows who are very distinguished in their field, including Louise, and we are sort of make the case, as it were, for humanities, social sciences, and the arts, and we're a funder as well. So we're a charity, and we're a funder, and we fund research, and we do some policy, and we do policy work as well. So that's the area that we focus on, and that's the roles, some of the main roles that I have. Yeah.
Superb. And Louise?
Thanks. I'm a professor of sociology of education at UCL, and we've been doing research for many years with trying to understand young people, what shapes their aspirations, what shapes their trajectories. And we also really love doing research with teachers. So we do loads of work with primary teachers, secondary teachers, looking at ways that we can support their pedagogy to make it more equitable and inclusive.
Fantastic. We will be discussing all of that a little bit later on regarding the Aspires project, what it's all about, how schools can get involved, and what it does essentially. But before we do all of that, I think it would be good, and I'm going to pitch this question to Julia, but Louise, feel free to get involved too. When I was sort of prepping up this show, it's terrible, I know, but I had not heard of SHAPE. Does that make me a criminal?
That is a good job I'm here, Tom. It's a good job I'm here. What can I say?
I'm a history teacher, so surely I should have heard of that.
So surely you should. But in your defence, she says, as the legal advisor here. No, in your defence. So SHAPE is relatively new, a newcomer to the lexicon, as it were. So SHAPE stands for Social Sciences, Humanities, Arts for People and the Economy. And it was it was a group of us who came up with the term SHAPE. So these are people who are key supporters. So the Academy of Social Sciences, for example, those working in the other major funding bodies, the British Academy, other kind of key proponents in politics or government or the arts, the creative industries. And the reason that we decided to just sort of think about having a new collective term for social science, arts and humanities is, to be honest, quite simply that if you're trying to make the case and argue the value for social science, arts, humanities, it's quite a mouthful, right? There's no standard definition. There was no standard sort of terminology. It might be AHSS. It might be Hass, which means hate in German, so that's not so good. It might have so a whole other range of things. So we thought, well, actually, language matters. We are a bunch of humanities scholars, amongst other things. And so the term shape came into being as being just a natural sort of extension of social sciences, arts, humanities. And then we thought, well, what are they about? They're about people and the economy, or indeed people's interaction with the environment, because you can use E for that. So they're both about those topics and issues, but they're also kind of for those topics and issues. So in other words, sort of helping to promote the understanding of people and societies across time and place, the understanding of key institutions such as the economy, but also to argue that actually they have a value. And there's a really strong both intrinsic value for studying these subjects, but also, we have to think about in terms of, people want to think about their careers and their jobs and the economy and growth, and politicians want to think about growth, etc. So there is something valuable about these subjects in terms of economics and economic growth. That's not the only value, but those who are interested in that argument for studying subjects, which we will, I'm sure, get into as to why do people choose the subjects that they do, then that is one key component. And so SHAPE is an acronym. And we thought, well, does it matter that people understand what it means? We thought, well, actually, STEM, and Louise, I don't know what, can't comment on this, but people know it's sort of science and technology, and then the engineering moves around, and then the M could be maths, could be medicine, could be, whatever. And that was an artifact. The term itself was an artifact that was developed in order to gain more funding, actually, in the US. And it took a while to catch on. So in a way, we just wanted to be able to have a conversation about social science, arts, humanities with the same ease that you can have a conversation about science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine by just saying STEM and SHAPE.
Got you. Okay. So why, if that's the definition for SHAPE, then why do you think that SHAPE disciplines are often undervalued by students in society? I mean, I would say, and again, this is just my personal view from a teaching point of view, I would say that they aren't necessarily undervalued by students intrinsically. I think they are. I think there's a lot more, if you like, signposting towards STEM in school for sure. Yeah. But in terms of the way they view it and the way they value it, I actually think if you look at like the uptake, for example, at history at GCSE level, it's always right up there. I'm going to mention art because Hannah's an art teacher, but art is always a popular subject. It's not that students don't sort of see it that way. So, I mean, society-wise, I can see it more. Yeah. But I wondered, from your perspective, why you think they're often undervalued.
Well, I think this is really interesting because it's undervalued by who, right? So, and I think you're getting to the heart of that in terms of thinking about, well, what students are wanting to do. But, then, and also, when is it they're making key choices, which is something I'm sure we'll come into. But in terms of that kind of the undervaluing, it tends to be, they're certainly not undervalued by business. Okay, so if you look at, for example, the data and at the British Academy, we've been doing quite a lot of research looking at salary levels, for example, of students who studied at university level or at higher levels. We have focused on university levels. And looking at the average salary levels, for example, and that of somebody who studied history is very similar to that somebody who studied biology, for example.
Yeah.
So in terms of, and when we talk to businesses about the sort of the skills that they value, there are certain core skills. So we often hear a lot about data skills, for example. We learn a lot of data skills in social sciences. You learn a lot about just the quantity. There are quantitative elements to, for example, social sciences. But you also hear a lot about the need for creative thinking, lateral thinking, the testing of ideas, the value of expression, the need for creativity. And when we look at career paths, you find that those who have studied the SHAPE subject can have more careers, as it were, through their working life than possibly those who study STEM, which suggests that they are more flexible, so they're more resilient. And if you then look to the sort of the standard observation which is made, which is, you know, significant number of the jobs which are being advertised for today weren't in existence, you know, 10 years ago. So you've got to be thinking in terms of not just what it is that people need now or businesses might need now, but what they might need in the future. So what we, in terms of who's doing the undervaluing, as it were, it's not necessarily businesses, but there is still a perception, and some of it's been a political perception. That might change at the moment. What I'm talking about in a UK context, that they don't go anywhere. Well, what's the use of knowing about history, or what's the use of knowing about geography, or what's the use of knowing about, you know, name your shape subject. And I do think that can then percolate through. Now, Louise has done much more work on this than we have in terms of what influences students' choices, though we've been doing some. But in terms of that can percolate through the peer group, it can percolate kind of through those that kids are going to for advice or advising them on their careers. So I think it is really interesting, partly to challenge that issue, that notion of them being undervalued, by just really sort of talking about, well, by whom are they being undervalued, and is there any empirical basis for the claims which are being made in relation to those shape subjects.
Got you. And by the way, we've just hit 150 people tuning in. So if anybody who's watching wants to engage in any way, this isn't just us conversation. So you can post, if you're watching on YouTube, for example, you can post a comment. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you can post a comment. If you're watching on X, you can post a comment, and we will involve you in this conversation as well if you have any questions throughout. No, that makes perfect sense, Julia. What you're saying. I wondered, what are the current trends when it comes to the studying of shape subjects? I mean at any level, you know, sort of like from 11 all the way through to post 18.
Yeah. So we've done, so as I say, at the Academy, we've been tracking trend data for GCSEs and A-level take-up, and the equivalents in Scotland, because obviously it's evolved. So this is a UK kind of conversation, and I'm conscious there might be people coming in from other countries where the experience might be similar, might be different. It would be really interesting to learn. And our most recent report came out just when the A-level results came out in August, a couple of weeks ago, which focus on what's happening at A-level. So obviously in the English system, or largely English system, English and Welsh system, you have quite a narrowing there. So, and what we've been finding is that over the last 20 years or so, we've found that you've got an increasing clustering, as it were, of what students are choosing to take. So increasing proportions of students are electing to take subjects that sit within the same major subject groups, either all STEM or they're all shape. And that's particularly notable in English students at post-16. We think part of that the research has done is there used to be the AS levels, and then the AS levels would, your mark on your AS level would contribute to your A level. Since that decoupling, then we found that actually you've got a narrowing down of the subjects that students are taking, and which is a really quite interesting thing. So what we've also been finding is that there's those which have been exclusive, as I say, are clustering into either all STEM or all shape. So that's gone up from the proportion doing either all STEM has gone up from 18% in 2003 to 4 to 35% in 21-22, for example.
Interesting.
So that's quite an interesting thing. And the other thing which has been a decline is students taking something from, for example, a social sciences, a humanities, and a STEM. So back in even just 2015, 2016, so much more recently, about 14% of the cohort were doing a three-way split, as it were. Now it's only 5%. So which is, a shrinking down of the options. So students are specialising much earlier, I suppose, than they might do before. And obviously our university system then just encourages that specialisation going forward. So if you've got lower numbers doing, for example, arts and humanities A levels, and we've seen a drop off in those, then you've got fewer going on to university to study arts and humanities. And we found that the likelihood of somebody studying arts and humanities has declined in the last 20 years by about 21% in humanities and about 15% in the arts. So long-term trends. So we have little bumps year on year. So this year more students took music than they did last year, but that doesn't correct a long-term trend. And one of the biggest declines has been in languages, modern languages.
Yeah. Louise, I think you were going to come in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think it's interesting. This is a real quirk of our national system. So this is like, we really specialise early, but not every other country does that. Countries that have more of a baccalaureate system, there's much more of a mixture, taking a mixture of subjects. And I think in the, the modern world and the range of skills that you need for the range of jobs and portfolio working, I think it's something that we could look usefully at in this country.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, just coming back to what you were saying, Julia, about languages, is this all relates to teachers, obviously, because there aren't enough language teachers, and a lot of high quality languages teachers have left the profession. So this isn't just to do with, so therefore that's going to potentially affect the engagement and the enjoyment and the progress that children perceive that they're making in certain subjects. If good teachers are leaving, then they become a bit more disenfranchised or disaffected about a particular subject, maybe, that they might have actually liked. Exactly. So I don't know whether, do we know, for example, you've mentioned the decline there. Do we know why that decline is there? Do we know the reasons why that decline is there?
The drive for languages specifically, I think I'm not sure it's easy to disentangle that from the sort of broad factors that are driving choices anyway, in terms of generic factors such as students' background, socioeconomic group, for example, gender. But just so really untangling those dynamics, I think one of the things that you're kind of highlighting, Tom, is that it's the dependency. So it's very easy to create a kind of vicious downward spiral. So we've got fewer language teachers, so it's harder for schools to provide good quality language teaching. So students aren't as well taught. For example, they don't have the same opportunities, and many areas don't have the same opportunities to study languages. So fewer of them will study languages, which means fewer of them will go on to university to study languages, which means there will be a lower supply of future language teachers who have been trained to a higher level in languages. And so that will go down. So you've got this, I think what hasn't really been understood very well are these dependency cycles. And obviously they take quite a long time to work their way through, right? Because it takes from a student being 16 to then being 18 to then qualifying to being a teacher to being actually in front of a class, from 18 to 24. It's a good 16. They've had to make that choice at 16. So it's 10 years from kind of a choice at 16 to creating a language teacher, really, I suppose, isn't it? Possibly a bit less, but so these are very long-term trends which are going to have quite a structural impact on the availability of high-quality teachers. Now, I think, to be honest, and Louise might come in as well on what's happening in STEM, but we see the same in physics. So actually, you've got the same dearth of qualified physics teachers as you do language teachers, for similar reasons. They either don't go through, or if they do go through, and of course, you've got to scope for the fact that everybody who studies languages aren't going to become a teacher, so you've got to have a much bigger pool of people to allow for the fact that people make different career choices. So it's stemming this or addressing this now is really important for actually what our teaching workforce, as it were, terrible word, but what our teachers' profiles and experience and expertise is going to look like in 10 years' time.
I also appreciate what you did there by using the phrase "stemming it" when we're talking about STEM. I just thought I'd mention that, because I don't know if
We've
you
got
did
to
it
shape
on purpose.
The future, Tom.
If you didn't do it on purpose, it still deserves massive credit. If you did it on purpose, then some would say that's genius. So well done. Okay. Final question about shape. Why do you think that? Oh, and by the way, we've had a few comments. Thank you to one of our regular watchers and listeners, Pat Link, the legendary Pat Link, who watches and listens to a lot of TTR shows since 2021. Thank you, Pat. Pat says, stop calling science STEM only. Yep, absolutely. He's saying we have a very good uptake as I'm the STEAM coordinator. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're saying. That I think we're saying there is a good uptake in STEM and STEAM subjects, but I think we're saying there's a decline in some others, maybe. Anyway, we can come back to that. Go on, Julia.
No, but I think that goes back to kind of subject mixes, doesn't it? And
Yeah,
I know,
yeah,
you know, for art, and you might want to say something about what's the trends in art, etc. And I do think there's, but I think it's when we actually just look at that long-term trend data, then we, and absolutely will kind of push for STEAM and the role of art and design in creative with science and the combination for that. But it's actually when you just kind of look at the data, the long-term trend data is for higher concentration in those clusters, and so not the kind of mixing, at least if you're just looking at the data for A levels, and it is only a particular data point. But Hannah, I don't know what you've seen in relation to art.
Yeah, I'm seeing it because I'm an art teacher, but I'm also an art moderator, and I'm actually careers lead as well. So I'm finding this very fascinating across the board, and that's the thing. There has been a real decline, especially in A levels, of kids going on and doing the arts, and I think that's that narrative that it's not an important subject, it's not a career opportunity, it's not got as many successful options. Actually, the research that backs it, the Cultural Learning Alliance did a big study years ago that actually it impacts your cognitive load, and actually you're better in your other subjects if you do an art subject. I think it's because of the discipline of the subject as well. You're going to have better, I think it's 35% better mental health if you do an art subject, but there still seems to be this kind of stigma that it's not an important subject. But and again, I think it is that narrative of the teachers. Are the teachers popping these bubbles? Because when I read those facts out to my year nines, they were like, I think one of the other ones is that a pupil premium student that's studying art are 8 times more likely to go to university. And they were like, you mean I like if I study art, I'm more likely to go to university? I was like, yeah, because it opens your mind and makes you think and problem solve in different ways. And I always tell them the story about how there's a hospital in London that gets an art teacher to teach the surgeons about creativity and problem solving, because they're so set in all the facts and they've done the sciences, but they've not added that kind of cooperation. I think that's really interesting. I worked at a sixth form that had a link with a specific science and maths sixth form, but the kids would come over and do art. So I had a lot of kids doing science A levels and art, and everyone was like, "It's a really weird combination." But I was like, but it really helped them, and they loved the balance, and lots of them went on to do architecture and things like that. So I think it is getting the narrative out for the kids, so they're learning what career path these can lead to, and how that combination of subjects, like, it doesn't mean that they're less intelligent because they've taken an art subject, and actually might enhance them across the board with all the skills that they learn from these different subjects. So it's lovely to see it being included.
Absolutely. And creative industries is the UK's fastest growing industry.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this is it. I mean, when you think about from a country perspective, what some of the biggest exports from the UK it's art, theatre, music. The creative sort of industry is massive around the world, like if we think about it in those terms. So it always interests me, that conversation. And coming back to what Hannah just said, and don't quote me on this research, but it is out there, that if you do 5 minutes of doodling in a day, it improves your mental health for the rest of the day. There's some, like, you'll have to look up that, someone might know it, but literally if you doodle on a piece of paper for a period of time and concentrate on it, apparently it has a knock-on effect on your mental health for the rest of the whole day. So, like, these are like anecdotal values, but also there's that bigger career value. And I wondered, like, why is it important that students appreciate the opportunities available when it comes to shape subject at school and university?
So I think it's, I mean, to go to Hannah's point, it's to open up your mind. So I like to say about, and the shape subjects themselves are hugely varied. You know, they've got different mindsets. You know, it might be objectivity, analytical, it might be subjective, understanding how somebody thinks, it might be expressive, creative, and different, and, you know, methods that go along that. But I think also one of the things that in terms of how it enables you to understand and perceive the world. So one of the things we've done, partnering with Futurum actually, who are putting out the materials, if we set up a little set of resources called Shaping Schools, which through object-based learning, they're all digital, and teachers can download them for free and you can use them for free. But just by taking one object, we sort of took a shape 360, as it were, of this object, and then started to pull out to students how all the different subjects that they study, they can be used as lenses, as it were, in which to look at this object. So one of the ones we picked on, and the same will go, you could expand it into STEM as well, but one of the ones we picked on, for example, we've got 4 actually, and I'll go into one. We did it during COVID. So one was masks, right? So we wanted everyday objects that kids would have lying around at home, or that they would know about. Masks, shoes, trains, and sugar, right? So you just take one of those objects, and all of a sudden, if you think about I can think about it from the point of view of history, for example. So I don't know, let's take trains. We could do the development of trains in history, right? How they came about, and that's really exciting because they're big and they're powerful. There might be industrial revolution there, and we can also think about the role that they played in different historical moments. We can think about tragic, not deeply, deeply painful, tragic moments of all the trains in the Holocaust, for example, being used to transport, Jews and prisoners. We can think about, however, trains as the expansion across the US, and the exploration of trade. And we can think about the role of trains and financing trains in economics, right? If we think about early trains and how you invest in trains, well, we could also think about trains, and we could think about contemporary challenges about, we could think about net zero and sustainability. Are trains a more sustainable way to travel rather than just burning fossil fuels? So then we could think about infrastructure, and are trains necessary for economic growth? And what is this thing called HS2 anyway? And why is there a row about it? And who wants a train and who doesn't want to train? And then you can think about trains in literature. Well, trains are really exciting. There's always a moment. There's always steam. Or there can be liminal moments, where you've got this passage of transition of a train. So you can just take an object, and then all of a sudden, if you think about it from different disciplinary perspectives, you can start to think about, gosh, I had never thought about this in that way. And so it gives you a kind of structured way, as it were, of thinking creatively and really expanding how you think about just this one object. And there are clear ways that you could extend that out into STEM. I mean, I'm not the engineer in the room, but ways that you could do that. And so we were talking to one art teacher when we were piloting this, and her class chose sugar. She was a drama teacher. And they all stood part of putting on different plays and productions about sugar. Some of them might be Willy Wonka, some of them might be about savory, some of them might be about chocolate, some of them might be about, different properties. So, and then bringing it back to the subjects that they're studying to sort of see, as it were, the real world value and relevance of what can seem to be quite abstract, which is what you're doing at 2:10 to 2:40 on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, spot on. Just to reflect back there, Julia, on what you said about these resources, if anybody's actually interested in getting those free resources that you mentioned, which are excellent, then we highly recommend scanning this QR code and visiting futurumcareers.com. And if you just search on their website for SHAPE, you'll find the resources written by Julia and others around this subject, which you can freely download. There's no sign up required on the website. There's no actual point of access there. It's literally just you can just get it all without registering. Now, we would recommend that you register for their newsletter, which you can do on that link, and then obviously you'll be updated whenever they release any new stuff, which I think is highly recommended. I've been on there for the last couple of months, and I've personally found things that I can use in the next academic year in my teaching, so that's really handy. And everything on there is free, which is fantastic. So definitely check that out, teachers who are here. I want to sort of change tack a little bit and bring Louise in at this point. And I want to ask you, Louise, a little bit about science and when I hear this phrase sort of put around a lot of science capital. What on earth does that mean? What is science capital?
It's just a way of really holding together, capturing all your science-related resources and stuff that you might have. So it refers to your science-related sort of knowledge, what you know, your attitudes, what you might think about science, what you do in your spare time. Are you, going on science online things, looking at science programs, and who you know and what you do. So are there people in your lives who you talk to with about science, or who encourage you? Like if you're a young person, have you got family members at home who've got sciencey jobs who are saying science is where it's at, this is what you should be doing in the future? And we've found that kind of the more of that sort of science forms of capital that you have, statistically, perhaps unsurprisingly, the much more likely you are to aspire to do science in the future and to actually then go on and take it at A level and at degree level. And we've also done that across STEM. So the more of, the more engineering related experiences you might have, the more likely you might be able to go into engineering and so on.
Brilliant. Okay. Now you are part of a project called the Aspires project. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that project? It's very interesting. Tell us some of the headlines from it as well, if you can.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So it's a longitudinal project. So we've been tracking the same cohort of young people from age 10 up to 22. So it's been going a long time, but it's been fantastic. We've got we use surveys and we use in-depth interviewing over time as well. So we get this kind of breadth and depth of understanding. Really, we're interested in what shapes a young person's pathway. How do they come to end up doing what they're doing? And in particular, we're interested in what is it that makes some young people go into STEM and not others, particularly because we know that that's socially patterned. So if you look at who's going into like physics and engineering and computing, for instance, you're much more likely to find boys, particularly from more middle class backgrounds and particularly white and some South Asian backgrounds. So we're interested in how do these patterns come about? We all think our choices are just, individual, what we want to do, but actually they're very socially patterned. So by looking across these surveys of, thousands of young people to date and the interviews, we get a sense of what it is that's the key factors shaping decisions.
Got you. Okay. So what did the Aspires project uncover? What was it that it actually found out, so to speak?
As it's a sociological approach, obviously the answer is it's all very complex. But in a nutshell,
come on, give us the quick plate, Louise. Come on.
I think you can kind of boil it down to the interaction of factors to do with your identity. So whether you see a subject area as fitting with your identity or sense of self or not. Your capital, so whether you have the quote unquote right sorts of resources to help you understand and navigate a path in that area, to help you do well in it. And crucially, it's also the educational field. And I think this is the bit that we found often gets forgotten. So we often focus on young people making choices and being agentic, but actually our education system and subject fields themselves do a lot to stop young people and to put them off and to make it really difficult for them to continue. So, for instance, we've had lots of young people who started our study and for many years have been super interested in, let's say, science or physics, but there are these barriers along the way and these things which happen to make them feel like it's not for them. So, for example, in physics, we had quite a lot of young women who really liked it and were really good at it. But when we came to interview them, say, around age 18, say, would you do it at university? Many of them were telling us, well, I love it, but it's just too difficult. I think it would be too hard. And it's not that they haven't got the capability, but it's like we have all these stereotypes around subject areas. We also have educational practices like grade severity. So we know that subjects like physics and chemistry are marked harder than some other subjects, which then translates into schools having stronger gatekeeping practices around those subjects. So I don't know about it in your schools, but in many schools, you really have to have the top marks to get on and do physics at A level, but that might not be the case with, let's say, sociology. So these things make a difference and they work in classed, racialized and gendered ways. That means that some young people are more likely to see it as being not for me than others. So we're interested in how do we kind of break down those sort of inequalities and those practices to help more young people just be able to choose whatever they want to do without these additional barriers.
In terms of circling back a little bit to the first thing you said about the science capital, what science capital is, how do teachers sort of, how can that be applied to teaching? And presumably this would be to any teacher, whether they teach a STEM subject or shape subject, whatever they teach. How can that whole science capital approach be applied to teachers and teaching in general?
Yeah, so we worked over a number of years with teachers in primary and secondary to develop what we've called the science capital teaching approach, but really it works for any subject. The principles are the same, and it's that how do we take the curriculum and not just contextualize it, but really close that difference between young people's identities in their lives and what we're teaching them. So how do we, and we're particularly talking about young people who tend to feel excluded from those subject areas. So it's really starting with the student. So some of this is, not rocket science. It's fairly common sense. It's good practice teaching, but real student-centered teaching. How do we also build in that, what we call that layer of capital? So supporting their attitudes and their ideas around the subject. So things that like Julia and Hannah were talking about earlier. How do we break through some of those stereotypes about a subject won't lead to a job when actually the skills in it are really applicable across the board? And how do we really get that resonance so that young people don't just feel they're the empty vessels to be filled with knowledge, but how do we build on the experiences, the interests, the things they know and care about, and really link that to the subject matter? And we found that when teachers do that, they get what they call these light bulb or meerkat moments, when they have these moments of connection, when the students just sit up in your class and you can just see that spark of engagement. It's like, oh, this is about me, I know about this. So those sorts of, it's fairly simple techniques, I think, we found in our research can make a real difference.
Can I ask as well, just from a geeky perspective, how did you sort of do this research project, the Aspires project? Like, what did you actually do? Did you contact schools? What did you do from a methodology point of view?
Yeah, in terms of the Aspires project, we we contacted primary schools, we generated a sampling frame, we sampled schools. We wanted to try and get a fairly representative sample of schools from different sort of demographic backgrounds and so on. And we conduct surveys, and then we also ask in those schools, who wants to participate in the interviews. So we then did that through secondary schools again as well. It got really tough once they left school. So because schools are fantastic for being able to find young people and sample them, but we then used the open electoral roll after that and did our sampling that way.
That's really interesting. Okay, that's brilliant. I wanted to just before we go anywhere again, it would probably be right again based on what Louise has said, that Aspire and the work they've done is part of the Futurum website. You can find more information on it by visiting the QR code which is listed on screen, and you can find out a little bit more, or you can visit the Aspires project itself, which is part of UCL. You can just give that a Google, have a look at what they do. I wanted to ask you, Louise, and I'm sure, I know Hannah's got some questions on this later as well, but I wanted to ask, what is your end goal with the Aspires project? What do you actually want to do with it, this information?
Our main goal, I think, is we really want to support policy and practice. So we want to be able to come up with ways for teachers and careers advisors and schools to help support young people, to make sure our teaching is as equitable and inclusive as it can be, that we're advising young people in the most useful and supportive ways. And we also want to support policy and funding. So we want to make sure that where we've got interventions, for example, to try and get more young people into STEM, that those are evidence-based and informed, and they're working on things that matter. So in particular, I think one of our goals is to try and shift a lot of the conversation from a focus, I'd say a general policy focus on trying to change students, into a focus on let's try and change the policies and practices that are creating and sustaining the problems in the first place. So supporting individual students is great, but they're not the problem, so to speak. So I think our end goal is to raise that issue of inequalities.
Brilliant. I might pass on to Hannah if Hannah's got any questions she wants to.
Well, I was just going to say, I found that very enlightening, because what you were saying about the physics, I loved physics at GCSE, and I went, I really fleeted with it and almost did it and went, no, and bottled it. And I kind of like, I loved it so much at GCSE, but I don't know why I didn't take that step. And it's the same with, everyone says the art subjects are easy, but to get, I think to get an A at A level in art, it's a 95% you have to get a 9, which is just crazy marks compared to some other subjects. So it is harder than you think it is. But I just wanted to ask you both, so kind of coming back to you both, you can, I don't mind which order you go in, you can fight over it. But how do shape and STEM kind of work and complement each other?
I mean, I think the interesting thing for me is that actually there's so much overlap. And also the kind of further you get with subjects in terms of, at which level you're studying at, by the time you get to degree, people are always telling us in the interviews we conduct with students, oh, actually it all mixes, doesn't it? Like there's creativity in engineering, there's not these very, very rigid boundaries. And I would love us to have ways of supporting young people to recognise that, so we don't silo everything off so much. I think when you can do projects and work which can draw across all the different subjects, you can really see and work those points of intersection as well, and really get that added value from seeing the intersections and not just seeing them as completely separate.
No, I'd say, listen, I'm happy to come in. I completely agree with that, and I think there's a sort of few ways to kind of think about that. One is I think the focus that I think the Aspires project is fascinating and really interesting for raising the wider question of why is it that students aren't necessarily choosing subjects that they really, really want to do, or why is it that students are framing their preference, as it were, in a particular way and thinking, okay, this is what I want to do. And then if they do really want to do something, so to Hannah's your point about physics, for example, why are they not doing that? Because I think ultimately and fundamentally, we shouldn't really be focusing on trying to get students to do more STEM or more shape. We should be getting students to focus on doing subjects that they really enjoy and that they find exciting, because ultimately they will find their way right through careers. I think we end up being very, very careers focused. But to be honest, if you do a subject because it's going to get you a good job, but you absolutely loathe it, you're not going to do very well. And that's going to have more impact on your future earnings than others. So I think some of the insights that we get from the projects like Aspires, to be thinking about, well, how can we be truly inclusive in our classroom and truly really think about giving students that a full range of opportunities. And I'm going to plug the Futurum Careers site again, actually, not because they've been fantastic for us with Shape. I just also profiling different careers, saying it's not just about careers, but different opportunities and different types of people. And for people to go, one of the things we wanted to do for Shape was to enable, students to think, that could be me. That could be me. Of course, that could be me. And we should be saying that for every student. So I think there are things that what the studies that we're all doing, and why do students take languages, why do they not take physics, what are they doing here, that we should be pooling those resources and mobilizing those for the benefit of students, no matter what subjects they want to do. But then in terms of how is it these subjects, as it were, can dock together in useful ways? I mean, STEAM was raised before, and we talked about the creative industries. I mean, there's huge overlap between engineers, computer programmers, technology. Some of the big advances in AI are actually coming through the creative industries and in that creative context. And I did some work on the creative industries and the role of R&D in the creative industries for the Prime Minister's Council on Science and Technology, and put it into the previous government and put it into this government as well, just to sort of say, well, listen, there's this huge symbiotic relationship actually between, in that area, for example, the creatives and the techs and the engineers. So you need the lighting engineers and the sound engineers, but you need the creatives as well. And each pushes the other, to create new advances. But also, just if you think about, we've got enormous social challenges at the moment. Okay, one of the most pressing is climate. We are not going to get anywhere near climate mitigation and climate adaptation if we don't take the best insights from understandings of the physical environment, from understandings of engineering, from understandings of renewable energy, but also from understandings about economics, about how we get a just transition, about how we compensate, developing countries for actually keeping their natural stock in place, for example, how we get people to change their behaviors, how do we get people to eat less meat, how do we get people to drive their cars less, how do we get those behavioral changes. All of that requires the social sciences, humanities, and the arts, in order to mobilize and get that solution. So none of these problems or issues come in single boxes with a single label that says, biology only, no one else may enter. That's just not the way it works. And there's a lot of crossover, for example, in health, in social sciences and health and behavior, etc. Most of the diseases that people are dying from now in the early 21st century are actually not infectious diseases. They're chronic diseases related to health and related to lifestyle and environment. To address those, we need to be able to understand those. So there's lots of synergies in particular industries, but also in terms of all the different skills that we need, and we need all of them in order to address, for example, some of these really major social issues that we have.
I just think that's so interesting, and I think this is for anybody out there that is watching this. Just send the link for this recording to your careers lead so they can see it. We need to be encouraging children to pick subjects they enjoy and do jobs that they enjoy, and that I think is a lot of the issues with adult mental health, is that they pick careers and pick jobs that they kind of thought were the best ones, but didn't actually pick things that they enjoyed. And I think that's a really key concept. And then also, especially, I'm going to send this out to all my art teacher buddies, but send this to your SLT so they understand the importance of your subject and the benefits that everything give and the different options. I think it's so important that they see all these crazy different things that they could be doing, and it's not these X, Y, and Z, these basics. There are so many different areas they can go into. And same as I'm dyslexic and neurodivergent, so I'm big into that. But a lot of neurodivergent people, they're really creative and they think differently. And I think is it NASA? A lot of them, the majority of the staff there are neurodivergent because they think differently. And actually, we need to encourage those kids that potentially think that's a disadvantage in school because they struggle, can actually have a real advantage in a workplace. They just got to find the place that can make them tick and the subject that makes them interested. And it's just, I thoroughly enjoy this. So make sure you're passing this on so that everyone gets on the same page, because I just think it's really important to get these kids into the right places. But like you said, it's getting the right people listening and talking about it. And talking of that, so what practical actions can teachers take to increase the visibility of SHAPE and to help with the discipline of careers and things?
So I think similar things to go to the point. It is about SHAPE. It is about STEM, but it's not about putting them up in competition with one another. It's not about kind of trying to grab some of those students that are doing, I don't know, sociology and turn them into physicists, etc. I mean, students should go wherever they, that hopefully their ability overlaps with their preference, right? So you want to be able to find that nice kind of niche where those things overlap. But I do think in the context of SHAPE, it is to burst some of the bubbles, as it were, some of the myths, which are often around what kind of a job can you get with English? Well, actually, quite a lot of jobs you can get with English. What kind of job? Well, where will history take you? Where will art take you? Well, actually, it can take you a number of different really interesting and exciting places. So not to be afraid of the future, that you might be closing off options by taking a subject that you absolutely love. You will not be doing that. The evidence is not there to show it. And then also so it's to burst those bubbles. I think it's also to get others from outside. So it might be from, local businesses, and say, well, actually, who do you employ? Or who's having good careers, or get people in who are really interesting, who have unusual careers. So the people who set up Airbnb, for example, one of them was an English student. Well, I mean, who knew? Who knew? So just, they can take you in really interesting interesting places and places you don't know yet what they might be.
I mean, just to jump in on that, from my own sort of experience of school, I mean, when I was 15, 16, you know, I was quite disenchanted with a lot of the subjects I was studying and stuff like that. And one of the ones that I mean, at that time, remember, I didn't even have drama lessons. Like we didn't even have drama on the curriculum, right? I mean, I had art, but didn't have drama, didn't have really anything beyond a really sort of strict core of subjects. And but even from a careers point of view, you know, things that would have, you know, like knowing about different schools and different things to do post 16 weren't really, it just, I just was completely unaware. Like, I'm not saying, I just think a lot of people I think things are improving, and things improve hugely since when I was just finishing school, which would have been like the late 90s, early 2000s sort of time. You know, my generation now, I just know so many people who I wouldn't say regret the choices they made. They didn't know that certain avenues were available. They were pushed away from doing certain things for whatever reason. They were made to think that they were not very good because they didn't do well in particular exams or qualifications, but actually there wasn't another option for them anyway. So it wasn't as if we were saying, you've not done very well, but why don't you try doing this because you enjoy doing it? There wasn't even that conversation. It was like, you haven't done well, you need to do it the same thing again and again, which I think I said was insanity. But that's essentially what we did, you know, back in the day. I do think things have improved a lot since then. You know, for example, having careers leads in school would have been, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it just wouldn't have probably happened, really. I mean, there may have been somebody who had it, a teacher who had it as almost like a gesture, like, you're the careers person, but they didn't actually really do as much as they would now with it. It's not as, you know, it's very, very sort of prominent now in people's thinking.
I mean, I think where we I think there's a big gap, and again, this is not just a UK conversation, but an English conversation, because it is devolved. But for at the post 18 choices, we're very clear on how to get to university. There's a lot of transparency. It's very easy to find out about lots of different courses. After that, not so easy. If you don't want to go down that route, very difficult.
Sorry, this is just me waving at M. Ross, who has said hello and waved. So I'm just saying hi. Hello, M. Ross. We're here. Yeah, no, absolutely. But one of the things I wanted to sort of ask you both, and maybe Julia first, just because we're on the topic, what do you think of schools that sort of, do you like the idea of putting up displays with like the famous people who've studied history, for example, like, and that sort of thing, like, you know, like a big sort of poster displays and like promotion of people who've gone on to be presidents and prime ministers who studied? I think Gordon Brown was one, and they always go Gordon Brown. You know, is that one thing that you would have within the toolbox, or is that something that you go, no, that's pointless?
So we go to our research, don't we? We go to our user-centric. What is it that is going to resonate with these students, right? And if we are putting up pictures of people, they need to be people that the students have heard of. Huge amounts of respect for him, right? But he's probably not very relatable if you're sitting in, I don't know, you kind of 14, 15-year-olds, just like, well, who is that old guy anyway?
Gordon, we're sorry.
Anybody over the age of kind of 25 is old when you're 13, aren't they? So it's not that role models aren't good people to obviously put up, but it's obviously people who've got to resonate, haven't they, with the students, and it's got to be something that when they go, that could be me, that these are really inspiring role models, and it may be that there's something more about them. They came from a similar type of background. So to Louise's point in terms of, you know, the different social groups which dominate, as it were, so in different disciplines. So for, you know, there's a fair amount of research, for example, you know, you've got to see somebody who kind of looks like how you feel you look or how you feel you are for it to be a relevant role model. So hence a lot in relation, for example, women in STEM, isn't it? That, oh God, there is a woman who's actually currently trapped in space. That's, women can go and get trapped in space, as well as men getting trapped. That's equality for you. You can equally get trapped in space. But it does need to be things that resonate, doesn't it? Yeah, it's got to be stuff that resonates.
Everyone's trapped. Talking in space terms and just like in life terms. We've had a comment actually. JBL has said, Tom, this is surely what we're doing with maths. Students get daily lessons for 11 years and still can't pass maths. Why not let them drop it at 16 as we've done for many years? Focus on what teenagers can do and not on what they aren't so good at. Well, JBL, thanks for the comment. It almost feels like you're asking me to make a policy decision as sort of like the Labour Education Secretary, which I can't do. But what do you think, Louise and Julia, on this one?
I think this is definitely worth a whole show on its own. But I think for me, it'd be like, what are we counting as maths? Because I think there is a real value in making sure kids have particular forms of mathematical literacy for life. I'm not sure the current forms of maths that we test are all essential for everyone. That's very potentially problematic. But I think it's really, I really welcome the new curriculum review that's coming in now, because I think we do need to ask some of these questions around what do we need? What do kids need by the age of 16? What should we have,
well, what do you think, Louis? Tell us what you think. If you were advising that careers panel now and they said, what do you think these kids need? What would you say to them?
Well, one, I definitely want to listen to what teachers and young people think as well. But I think we have too packed a curriculum. I think there's too much in there. It's so much that you're expected to try and plough through. Where is the space for the love of learning and the development of understanding and connection? And I would want a bit less, but with more time. And I'd also want to, around that, give teachers more time to be able to do that thinking, like to have space to think and reflect. How do I want to connect this curriculum to the kids in my class? And I think it's that whole package. It's not just what's in the curriculum, but it's the pedagogy and the support and the valuing that we need to give teachers as well to be professional, to do that professional job and not just slog away and like, let's just grind out this content to pass an exam in a particular way.
Julie, I don't know whether you want to throw in your 2 pennies on that.
So I think, listen, this is really hard, right? Because I completely get the point on pruning back the curriculum, but then everybody wants their bit in it. Do you know what I mean? So everybody says, no, but don't cut my bit. That's fine as long as you don't cut my bit. But I think in terms of the so there is a term in relation, for example, to both maths and English, which is a functional literacy. What do you actually need to be able to function, as an adult, and actually in relation to maths, it's and I think English as well, it's fairly straightforward, in terms of I work in one of the areas I work in is financial regulation, which includes consumer protection. So how do people not be ripped off or mis-sold financial products? Right. And actually that's, when you look at the average financial literacy rate across the UK, it is that of a 10-year-old and it hasn't shifted. Okay, now if you're trying to, students will be going out and fairly soon so they're already in shops trying to work out what is the cheapest. Well, how do you work out the price per 100 grams, for example? So you've got to bring it down into a unit so you can be able to compare. So what do you have to do on it? It's 20% off in the shops. Okay, so what does that mean? How do I work out what that price is? So there's some functional literacy there. There's also, in terms of, for example, they'll be going out and they'll be borrowing money. They'll be getting a mortgage. Well, might be getting a mortgage, but they'll certainly be getting a credit card. So how do I understand, if I don't pay off my credit card, how much is it going to cost me and how am I going to work that out? And I think one of the things is just bringing it back to, I'm obviously not a maths teacher, but there's lots of research in relation to this. And Louise touched on it as well, which is bringing it back to something that students are doing every day and they can relate to. So when we go to the Shaping Schools, again, to bring that back in, what we deliberately did was choose objects that the students are already familiar with. Okay, so you start from where they are and the problem and thinking about that. So I think if we, again, not an expert on curriculum design, but just thinking about what is it we're trying to achieve by getting kids to go to school and to study these subjects. And I do think that rebasing, as it were, and rethinking, and also just enabling students to I mean, again, talk has come in of just getting at least just a functional literate kind of diploma. I am just functionally literate in something without having to expect them to go on and do the more advanced stuff, so that they don't feel that they're kind of continually badged as failure, but they've got something that they can aim for, that they can achieve, that will be useful for them as they go on to lead their lives.
Wow. Listen, we've unfortunately run out of time. We could have talked about this all evening because it's been absolutely fascinating. Just to finish, to say a massive thanks to my co-host Hannah, of course, but an even bigger thanks to Louise and Julia for coming on as guests this evening, because it's been absolutely interesting for anybody who's interested in careers, STEM, shape, any of the above. Really, so much good in there, so much to take away. It just leaves me to say a big thanks to Futurum Careers for supporting the show this evening. If you want to find out more about them, they have a whole plethora of free resources which are available by scanning this QR code or by visiting futurumcareers.com and just signing up to their wonderful free newsletter, where they will send you regular inputs of all the free stuff that they've got available to you as a teacher, which is amazing. If you haven't discovered their website, definitely go now and check it out at futurumcareers.com. That just leaves me to say that on TTR, we will be back tomorrow and actually in the next few days with about 10 shows. Wow. We've got just a constant stream of amazing shows like this one coming up for the whole of the next weekend. So if you are just that teacher who's going, oh, damn, I've got to actually teach kids again, then definitely tune into some of our shows over the next 3 or 4 days. They are there for you to listen to. Huge thanks to everybody again for tuning in live, especially everybody who's made the live comments. And we will be back with you again soon. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.